All right, hi everyone. Welcome to Anatomy and Physiology. And today we'll be discussing the circulatory system, or it's also called the cardiovascular system. So you can kind of go by whatever name you feel is easier for you. So what exactly is the circulatory system? So basically it's a closed organ system that permits blood to circulate and transport nutrients, such as, amino acids and electrolytes, oxygen, carbon dioxide, hormones, and blood cells to and from the cells in the body to provide nourishment and help in fighting diseases, stabilizing temperature and pH, and maintaining homeostasis. So it plays a very huge role in your body. Without it, you would die. And it includes the heart, obviously, and also includes a large kind of network of blood vessels, arteries, veins, and capillaries. And it also contains, your blood, which is made up of red and white blood cells and platelets. So the main function of the circulatory system or cardiovascular system is to deliver oxygen to body tissues, whilst simultaneously removing carbon dioxide produced by metabolism. So it brings oxygen to the tissues and then removes carbon dioxide from it. So and also the circulatory also works hand in hand with the respiratory system. So when you kind of breathe in, you're bringing oxygen in, and then your blood kind of circulates all that oxygen through your body, and then it produces carbon dioxide, which is waste, and then you breathe the carbon dioxide back out. Trees actually do the opposite. They take in carbon dioxide and produce oxygen, which is why trees are so important. And oxygen is bound to molecules called hemoglobin that are on the surface of red blood cells in the blood. So that is the main function the circulatory system plays. Of course, there's a lot more functions, but that's the main one. So here are just some quick facts to help get acquainted with this system more. So the heart is a muscle, as we discussed in previous classes, that consists of cardiac tissue and is about the size of your fist. So it's actually, I feel like most people think it's like smaller than it actually is. It's actually quite big. If you have small hands, of course, it might not be super accurate, but usually it's about the size of your fist. The circulatory system in the human body stretches 66,000 miles, which is more than 2.5 times the circumference of the Earth, which just says how much there is in this system. And what I mean is that the circulatory system contains of all the veins and arteries. So like when you take all those veins and arteries and kind of like line them up and put them in a straight line and measure, it'd be that long. So there's so many arteries, veins, capillaries, there's so many of those systems going on. It's just amazing. And the heart beats about 2.5 billion times during the life of a 75-year-old, more if you live longer than 75, but it beats a lot. The heart expels 2 ounces of blood with each beat, 5 quarts of blood each minute, and 220 million quarts in 70 years. So the heart is a very busy muscle. So bigger bodies actually have slower heart rates. It's shown in humans and animals. So smaller people or animals, either one, they tend to have faster, they have quicker heart rates, and bigger bodies have slower heart rates. And the more you exercise, or the more you get your heart rate up, the stronger your heart will be. So most professional athletes have extremely slow heart rates, as only one pump of their heart is that strong. um I think Lance Armstrong has he has like a heart rate, like a resting heart rate of like 30 or 40. Or maybe even 25. It's super low. That's because he's built it up so much that it's so strong and powerful that only one pump of it can expel, push out enough blood to kind of circulate the whole body. And like when you don't exercise the heart enough, it actually, it doesn't, with each pump, it doesn't expel a lot of blood, so it needs to beat more. So that's just a kind of fun fact. And I just wanted you guys to see how intricate and like complicated the system of arteries and veins and how they kind of stem from the heart right here. So it's like super intricate. There's so many of them. You can find, you know, veins, arteries, capillaries, you know, all that anywhere. And the thing is, like, there's so many small veins. Like there's these like huge veins, as you can see, like the thicker ones, and then there's a lot of like really, really small ones that you can't even see on this picture. So those count too. So here's some parts of the circulatory system, specifically the heart. So we'll start with the superior vena cava, which is a large vein. It's actually not like a part of the heart, it's just a large vein that leads into the heart that returns blood to the heart from the head, neck, and upper limbs. So remember that the superior vena cava, it returns blood to the heart. It doesn't, the blood doesn't flow away from it, it flows towards it. So on the picture, you can see it's right here and there's an arrow pointing down. So the blood actually comes from, you know, upwards, and then it goes down through the superior vena cava. Then we have the aorta, which is the largest artery in the body. So always remember that aorta is the largest one. So it's very, very important. It plays a major role. And it's the largest artery that carries blood away from the left ventricle. So we said the superior vena cava kind of goes into the heart. The aorta is bringing blood from out of the heart and into, you know, the lungs and like the rest of the body, and it leads away from the left ventricle, which is right here. The pulmonary artery is the main artery that supplies the lungs with deoxygenated blood, and we'll discuss what that means later. But, you know, I'll just kind of tell you now, because why not? Deoxygenated blood is basically blood without oxygen. So kind of the D means no, like there's no oxygen in the blood. And that's, yeah, and that is right here. It's the purple one right here, the big purple one. And you see all the arrows, that's where kind of the blood flows. So it can either flow to the right lung or the left lung and the right lung. So one thing you always want to make sure, in case you ever take like some kind of, if you take anatomy and physiology, you know, in high school or college, you always want to make sure, you know, especially for the heart diagrams, the reason it says, you know, left is on this side and right is on this side is because you're opposite of it. So right now, like I'm sitting like right across from it. And so like the right is like my left and the left is my right. And so, but make sure it's always opposite. You know, there's so many people who make that mistake. Just remember, it's just the opposite of what you think, because you are opposite. You're not standing on the same side as it. So usually on paper, your left is going to be kind of the right atrium and right ventricle, and then your right is going to be the left atrium and left ventricle. So just a little tip, I guess. Then we have the mitral valve, which is one of 4 valves that regulate blood flow from the upper left chamber to the lower left atrium, and it has 2 flaps, also called leaflets. So the mitral valve, it's right here. It's kind of, it's not like a tube or like a vein or an artery. It's just kind of like a valve that allows like blood in and out. They're kind of like little doors, if you want to think of it that way. They help, you know, control and regulate blood flow. And yeah, there's one right there. That's it right there. And it's in the left part of the heart. So within, like, it's between the left atrium and left ventricle as shown. And then we have the aortic valve, which is this valve. So this is a valve, that's the mitral valve. And then the aortic valve is right next to it. And this closes the lower left chamber. So remember, the mitral valve and the aortic valve are both on the left side. Closes the lower left chamber and it opens to allow blood to leave the heart. So, you know, it goes kind of in, it goes down, and then it goes back up and then out through the aorta, which goes, it carries blood away from the left ventricle. So yeah. And then here's some more parts. Yeah, the heart has a lot of tubes, a lot of parts. So now we got the left ventricle, which is this part. Remember, the ventricles are always going to be the ones kind of below the atrium. They're the kind of, I guess, bigger ones. As you can tell, the atriums are kind of smaller and they're divided by valves. So the left ventricle pumps oxygenated blood, so blood with oxygen, to the organs. And then the left atrium, which is right above that, it delivers blood to other parts of the heart and acts as a vessel for blood that comes from the lungs. Right atrium, which is on the other side right here, it receives deoxygenated blood and pumps it into the right ventricle. So pumps it down into the right ventricle, and the right ventricle pumps oxygen depleted blood, which is basically deoxygenated blood, into the lungs. So you can see it goes kind of down the superior vena cava into the right atrium, down into the right ventricle, and then up into the pulmonary artery, which goes to the lungs. So there's kind of like a big pathway that we'll discuss later. There's also the inferior vena cava, which is a large vein that carries blood to the right atrium from the lower and middle body. So we discussed the superior vena cava, the inferior vena cava. If you remember our first class, our directional terms, superior means above and inferior means below. So superior is always going to be at the top, and here's the inferior vena cava, which is at the bottom. It carries blood to the right atrium. The tricuspid valve, it prevents a backward flow of blood into the right atrium, which is this one. Tricuspid valve is always on the right side, while the mitral valve is always on the left side. And the valves are like kind of there to make sure that, you know, the blood doesn't go like backwards. There's like a specific path the blood must take to, you know, get it all over your body and, you know, make it successful. So it's to make sure that the blood doesn't go from the right ventricle back into the right atrium, which would be very bad because it's supposed to go the opposite way. That's what the valves are kind of for. Then we got the pulmonary valve, which moves blood towards the lungs. Pulmonary valve is labeled here. Yes, it is. It's this one. It's the opposite of the aortic valve, I guess. It's kind of right next to each other. Remember that the tricuspid and pulmonary valves are are in the right side of the heart, and they're kind of right next to each other. And this moves blood towards the lungs because it goes up into the pulmonary artery, which leads to the lungs. So that's just kind of all the parts of the heart for you. So now we're going to talk about blood flow. So deoxygenated blood, like I already kind of explained, it means blood without oxygen. So deoxygenated blood has not yet entered the lungs to receive carbon dioxide yet. So basically they just kind of they don't really have any thing in it. It's going on its way to receive carbon dioxide from the lungs, but it hasn't yet. And then oxygenated blood means blood with oxygen. So it's blood that has entered the lungs. It's already been in the lungs and it's returning to the heart to get, you know, recycled and then, you know, back through the body and stuff. So that's just the difference between that. And you can see, I know you probably noticed in this previous diagram how like the right is blue and the left is red, you know, reddish pink. And it's usually labeled like that because the blue means deoxygenated. So deoxygenated blood always goes through the superior vena cava and it goes down to the right atrium, right ventricle. It's still deoxygenated, and then it goes into the lungs to get oxygenated, and then it goes back and then the oxygenated blood kind of goes into the red part and then out through the aorta. So that's why. And you can also kind of see it here. Remember, blue is always deoxygenated. Sorry, I can't really say it. And then I just kind of highlighted in blue and red to make it easier. So the red always has to deal with oxygenated and the blue always has to deal with deoxygenated. And this is just kind of the pathway it takes. So it goes in from the superior vena cava into the right atrium, then through the tricuspid valve, then into the right ventricle, and then it goes up into the pulmonary valve, and then it goes to the pulmonary artery and then to the lungs, and then from the lungs it actually goes back into the heart. So actually it says pulmonary veins right here from left lungs, so it goes through these little veins and then into the left atrium, so now it's oxygenated, into the left ventricle, and then through the aortic valve right here, then up through the aorta, which is like that big red thing at the top you see, and then it goes throughout your body to deliver oxygen from your to everything in your body, because everything is now oxygenated. So it's kind of cool, a very specific path. Just remember it goes through the right side first. I always thought it kind of went through the left side, but I was wrong. And it always starts from above, from the superior vena cava, and always starts with like the deoxygenated blood, so always blue. And arteries are this, I just thought this would be nice to know. Arteries are kind of like the pathways your blood takes, arteries and veins, but the main difference is that arteries lead away from your heart. So kind of arteries away, they both start with A. That's kind of how I remember it, I guess. And then we have the veins, which lead towards the heart. So veins bring blood towards your heart, and arteries lead it away from the heart into the rest of your body. So that's the difference between that. Here's just a quick video. It's more on blood flow. I'm not gonna play it right now because for time's sake, but you can always kind of review it. I think it's really nice refresher, a nice quick refresher. If you want more, review on it, you can always check out Crash Course or Khan Academy or slightly longer videos. But I just thought this be like a cool little video to show what everything I just kind of went over. Nice little refresher. So let's talk about your heartbeat. So your heart is an involuntary muscle, as we discussed many times in previous classes, and it beats 24/7, so 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year until the day you die. Without your heartbeat, that's most, without your heart, without a heartbeat, like that's when most people declare someone, dead. And doctors use stethoscopes to listen to heartbeats. You guys probably know what a stethoscope is. It's kind of like those things doctors have around their necks, and they put like the two loby things in their ears, and then like a circle, and they put on your chest and your back. Normal heartbeat sounds kind of like a lub dub. The mitral and tricuspid valves closing called the lub sound. So as we discussed in our previous slides, the mitral and tricuspid valves are the ones that allow blood to flow from the atrium to the ventricle. So that's kind of what makes the lub sound. And the dub sound is caused by the closure of the aortic and pulmonary valves after the blood has squeezed out of the heart. So after it goes through the ventricles, it goes back up, remember, into the aortic and pulmonary valves, and that's the dub sound. So the lub dub sounds are kind of caused by your valves. Your heart valves are very important, and it's without them, your heart wouldn't actually like make a beating sound. It actually wouldn't be, and that'd be very scary because how would people know you were alive? So a normal resting heart rate for adults ranges anywhere from 60 to 100 beats per minute. But like I said before, most excellent or like professional athletes have maybe heart rates as low as like 30 to 40. But anywhere in between 60 and 100 is normal. Most people I know, I think, have 60 to 80. 100 seems a little much, but that's still considered okay. And of course, when you exercise, that the heart rate increases because your body is working, trying to get oxygen to your body faster, so you can move more and run faster or do whatever you're doing faster. So your heart has to work faster. And since your heart is a muscle, even though it's not like a physical muscle or you can like lift weights and like build that muscle, it's really important to keep your heart muscle really healthy because we're going to discuss it later, but the cardiovascular system is like the number one system that has like the most diseases and illnesses and cause of deaths in the United States. So it's a really big issue, and you really should be exercising to keep it healthy. Even if you don't have a stethoscope, you probably already know this, but you can still feel your heartbeat. There are something called pulse points. They're found on either side of your neck. Inside, I usually do I like my right side better. If you put your two fingers kind of on the side of your neck and find your carotid artery, you can feel your heartbeat there, which is kind of cool. And there you can also find on your wrist, but personally, I can't really feel it. I know some people can, and actually you can find one below your thumb, which is pretty cool. But yeah, you can kind of test it there. Now you've probably done experiments or assignments that make you kind of count the number of heartbeats you have, maybe in gym class or science class, number of heartbeats you have in like a minute, using your fingers on your pulse points. So components of blood. So blood is a fluid. So it's has a liquid matrix, and it moves through the vessels of a circulatory system. And in humans, it includes plasma, which is basically a liquid portion. Blood cells, which come in both red and white varieties, and cell fragments called platelets. So plasma is the main component of blood. I actually thought it was, red blood cells made up most of blood, but it's actually plasma. And it's like a liquid mixture that consists mostly of water. And there's also some proteins, ions, nutrients, and waste. So it's kind of a mix of a lot of things. Then we have red blood cells, which are also called erythrocytes, which are responsible for carrying oxygen and carbon dioxide. Platelets, which are thrombocytes. That's like the fancy scientific name, if you want to call them that. They're responsible for blood clotting. So, whenever you get like a cut, your platelets in your blood will know that, you're bleeding. There's a cut, and they'll go and they kind of all work together to patch it up. But when you get like a big cut, like a really deep or long cut, you don't have enough platelets to simply just patch it all up. That's when you need to go to the doctors and get stitches or staples, or however they want to sew you up or fix the cut so you don't lose any more blood. Then we have white blood cells, which are leukocytes, which are part of the immune system. So the circulatory system really works with every other system, and it functions in immune response. So whenever you get sick, the white blood cells are going to try and attack the bacteria or attack the virus to keep you healthy and safe. So cells and platelets make up about 45% of human blood, while plasma makes up the other 55%. And the diagram, this diagram, it shows the red blood cells, which are, you can see that there's obviously a lot more red blood cells than white blood cells, which are the kind of purplish ones. Yeah, there's way more red blood cells. And you can't really see platelets under a microscope because they're like white in color. You gotta really stain them with like a special dye. But they're kind of like I don't know. They're kind of like like those spiky balls. Like they look like they'd be spiky. And they're kind of cool shaped, I guess. And then this picture, we kind of discussed bone anatomy in our skeletal system class. The blood is actually produced within the bone, and there's something called red marrow, or also called bone marrow. Yellow marrow, as we discussed, that's the kind of the fat part of it, but the red marrow is the place where blood cells are formed, and stem cells, which are cells that can turn into any kind of cell. They can turn into, bone cells, muscle cells, brain cells. So scientists are very curious with stem cells because, they're so unique, but stem cells are very limited and your bones produce them in limited quantities. And bone marrow is very important. You might have heard of bone marrow transplants. And that's when, kids especially, like really young kids, they have maybe cancer in their blood, which, leukemia or lymphoma, unfortunately, is very common in children. Most times to cure the cancer, they must get a bone marrow transplant, which will help because they have cancer in their blood, and a new bone marrow will help them, produce new healthy blood cells, which will fight the cancer. But, it has to be an exact match. And it's really hard to get a super exact match with bone marrow. That's why some parents decide to have another kid just to save their other kid. I know it sounds crazy, but it's actually quite common, sadly. And yeah, that's kind of how they cure most, not cure, but, help, uh, help, what's the word? Help treat, most leukemia and lymphoma patients. So here's more on blood cell production. So red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelet producing cells are all descended from a common precursor, a common ancestor kind of thing, and it's called the Hematopoietic stem cell. So it's kind of stem cell and for these stem cells, which are found in the bone marrow, one daughter cell remains hematopoietic stem cell, while the other goes on to be a different type of stem cell, either a myeloid stem cell or a lymphoid stem cell. And myeloid stem cells give rise to red blood cells, platelets, and some types of white blood cells, while lymphoid stem cells give rise to types of white blood cells classified as lymphocytes. And that's a big part of the your lymph system, your lymph nodes and all of that. Hematopoietic, myeloid, and lymphoid stem cells divide throughout a person's lifetime, which generates new blood cells to replace old and worn out ones. So that's kind of how your blood replaces itself. Kind of cool because you wouldn't think that it'd be produced inside your bones, but it is. So let's talk about blood pressure. So when the heart beats, it creates pressure that pushes blood through a network of tube-shaped blood vessels, which include arteries, veins, capillaries. And this pressure, which is known as blood pressure, is the result of two forces. So the first force is called systolic pressure, and it occurs as blood pumps out of the heart and into the arteries. And the second force, which is diastolic pressure, is created as the heart rests between heartbeats. So systolic is when the blood pumps out, and then diastolic is when the heart rests. And these two forces are each represented by numbers in a blood pressure reading. As you can see, blood pressure machines, they look like this. You can see the systolic, which is SYS, and the diastolic, which is DIA. And systolic is always going to be, slightly higher than the diastolic. So the upper number is always the systolic. So normal blood pressure is below 120/80, so 120 systolic, 80 diastolic. And if you're an adult and your systolic pressure is 120 to 129 and your diastolic pressure is less than 80, you have elevated blood pressure, which is like slightly high, but it's like not a huge issue, but it's like not normal either, but it's not classified as high blood pressure, which like happens when you have a systolic pressure of 130 or higher, which is pretty high, or a diastolic pressure of 80 or higher, and that stays high over time. So high blood pressure, if you have just high blood pressure like once, like it doesn't really count. They kind of classify it by you have high blood pressure for a very long time, and that can lead to very detrimental effects on your body. You don't want to have high blood pressure. That's just, it's not good. It probably means you have like some plaque or extra fat and cholesterol in your arteries and veins, which is really bad. So here's some diseases of the circulatory system. So it's actually the most, it's like the system that produces the most, deaths and surgeries and all of that in the United States. So first we got hypertension, which is the fancy scientific word for high blood pressure. So as I said before, high blood pressure is really bad over a long period of time. Usually doctors treat it with medicine and they ask you to eat healthy and, exercise to help the high blood pressure, which sometimes works. But when you have high blood pressure for a long time, that can lead to heart disease and heart attacks and just a lot of other bad stuff. Then we have atherosclerosis, which is a buildup of fats or cholesterol in your artery walls, which is like a plaque substance, it's really nasty. It's basically where your arteries are so clogged up, the blood is having trouble going through it. So it can lead in heart attacks, strokes, a ton of really bad stuff. Then we have the myocardial infarction, also known as MI, and that is basically a fancy word for a heart attack, which are super, super common, both in men and women, although heart attack symptoms vary from one gender to the next. And that's when your arteries and veins are like really clogged up and there's a clot and your blood can't pass through. So there's no blood going to your heart, and then that's when a heart attack happens. And usually heart attack symptoms are very subtle. Like it's usually just like stomach pain or just like nausea and stuff like that. So it's like a silent killer. It sucks. It's really deadly. Then we have atrial fibrillation, which is kind of irregular and mostly it's rapid heart rate that occurs when the two upper chambers of your heart, which is your atria, which is when the atria experiences chaotic electrical signals, and there's different ways to treat it. It's not like super deadly. There are ways to treat it. I think a way is to place a pacemaker in your chest, and whenever your heart starts to like beat unusually or like kind of stop or it's super irregular, your pacemaker will sense that, and then it will send electrical shocks to your heart to make it kind of a regular beat, which is kind of cool. It sounds scary, but I once knew someone who had a pacemaker, and they said it was pretty pretty smooth sailing. Heart murmur is kind of it's an unusual sound heard between heartbeats. So the doctor will kind of put a stethoscope to your chest, and they might hear a unusual sound. Usually, heart murmurs are very they're not dangerous. They're mostly just yeah. I don't really know like why they're not like super dangerous, but usually they're just not a big deal, and they kind of go away as a person grows up. They're usually more common in babies and younger kids. Then we have arrhythmias and dysrhythmias, which are basically both improper beatings of the heart, like atrial fibrillation. It can be irregular, too fast, or too slow. A stroke is the sudden interruption in the blood supply of the brain. Strokes and heart attacks, they're both like the number one leading causes of death in the United States. It's kind of like a heart attack, but there's no blood to your brain instead of your heart. And when your when your brain doesn't get enough blood, that has disastrous consequences for the rest of your body, and it's very, very deadly. Then we have aortic aneurysms, which an aneurysm is basically kind of like a normal bulge. So it's like a bump kind of in your aorta, which is, if you recall, it's like the largest vein in your body. It's huge, and just kind of like a aneurysm. And if it blows, it's really bad because it just like when it like blows, there's just a bunch of like nasty things in your body. You don't want things that should be in your aorta in like other parts of your body, because there's a reason they're not in the rest of your body. So, and then we have peripheral artery disease, also known as PAD, which are narrowed arteries that reduce blood flow to your limbs. So they usually occur in your arms or legs. So people with PAD will feel like pain in their legs, like their legs might give out because there's not enough blood to support their weight, or not enough blood flowing to like support them walking or running. So like sometimes they can't even move. Then we have venous thromboembolism, which is also called VTE, and that's when a blood clot forms in the deep veins of the legs, groin, or arms. This is fixable by surgery. It's usually not like super serious, but it can be painful because it is a blood clot. And those are just some of them. And this is what I was talking about with the blocked arteries and veins. You can see like that's why doctors say you should eat a very healthy diet, because when you eat too many fats or too much cholesterol, which is basically found in salty foods, cholesterol is kind of like salt. Um, all the excess fat and cholesterol your body can't really digest, it goes into your veins and arteries because it's carried by blood. And over time, if you keep up this diet for a really long time, like for years, it can build up in your veins and arteries and create kind of like a plaque, which is like, it's just as nasty as it sounds. It's like sticky, it's disgusting, it just clogs everything up. And you can see like these little red things on the left picture. Those are actually red blood cells trying to get through, because it has to bring oxygen throughout the body. It just can't get through because of all the plaque, that's the yellow stuff. And when the whole circulatory system, it's like a huge like path, like it goes there's a very specific path it must take. And like when one of those, you can think of it as like a stream. So like if you put like if you put up a dam on a part of the stream, you know, no water will flow to the other side of the dam, and that's kind of like what's happening in the veins and arteries. You know, it can't get past it, so the rest of your body doesn't have any blood, and that's when a stroke or a heart attack can occur, and it's very serious because the whole blood flow system kind of just stops. And you can see over time on this right picture, it looks pretty clean up top. You know, you can't see any visible super huge plaque, and then you can kind of see it start developing, and you know there's less space for blood to go through. And then the third picture, there's very limited space. It's just going to keep closing up. Ooh. Well, that's the end of the lesson. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, you can email me here, and I'll see you next week. We'll probably be discussing the respiratory system, and yeah, I can't wait. So I will see you guys next week.